Hey, this is going to be a discussion about the test that's coming up next week. And you're allowed to use a study guide on the test as long as it's created um, in a workbook. Okay, so what am I going to do with this video is I'm going to make sure that we get that started properly. And so what's the first key thing? I want you to go ahead and get your computer open and follow along. Why? Because I'm going to show you not only how to save your study guide, but to save it to a location where you can find it again. Okay, so just quickly what I'm doing is I'm going to the course calendar. Okay, so you should pause the video and make sure that you're to the course calendar. And all I'm going to do is click on first day assignment. Why? Well, you'll see why in just a minute, I hope. And I'm going to pause this until mine comes all the way open. Okay, so here I am in first day assignment. So let me do one thing first. Let me just show you file open. So if we go to file open, it brings up this file structure with all of these things. And this is lectures. It's actually lectures, but it got spelled with an R instead of an L. But if I click on public material, you'll see I have a folder for homework. And then all of the homeworks have all of these files in them. And the problem is that if I save it in one of these homework files, it just gets a little more difficult to find. But look at public material. Public material doesn't have that many files, so that's where I want to save it. I want to save it in this directory called public material. So let's do that. So I'm going to take file new notebook. Boom. When I do new notebook, I get an untitled notebook. And so let me just type in here and call it my study guide. We'll work on that in a minute. Okay, so I want to do file save as. Why? Because it brings up this directory and I'm allowed to save it as a study guide there, and this will save it in that directory public material, save. Okay, so now just to show you, if I go file open and then make sure that I click on public material. Why? Because if I end up clicking on some other thing that brings me up to any of these other file folders, I can just click on the name public material, knowing that my study guide is going to be there. I'm sorry, that's the one from class before. And I can click here to open my study guide. Now I've got a couple of them open, so I'm clicking on some tabs. Okay, so what were you supposed to get out of that? Okay, click on any link you want to in the course calendar. Why? Because we wanted a new file, Python 3, and then we wanted to use save as and save it in the and save it in the public materials folder. Why? So we can find it again. Okay. And this is going to be just a couple little tricks. So I'm going to put a hashtag space study guide. You see how that got bigger? And all right, so I might want to call it Rob's Midterm Study Guide. Boom. So I have a nice title. Okay. And then what should go in this? And so what I'm going to do is we actually had a discussion in my in-person class about which methods the students think should go on it. But let me make a caveat right now. I don't think you should create my study sheet. You're the one who's going to be able to use it during the midterm, and you know the kinds of things you need. So I'm going to give you an outline and let you fill in some things. But we'll go over some ideas from my class, at least to get you started, and hopefully a good distance along the way. Okay, so I'm going to give you the brainstorming that we did, and this was with my students in class. And so the first row, they were talking about, all the things that we need to do with tables to get the data or the rows or the columns that we need. So they suggested that we needed to look at select, dot select and dot drop, and dot column. Dot column does the same thing as dot select, except that column returns an array and select returns a table. We need to be able to sort. We need to be able to show and take. And oh, there's one that's missing here. Let me quickly throw in the dot where. Sorry about that. And then they said we needed to be able to use dot num columns and dot num rows. and then the relabeled, right? Because we sometimes relabel. These three are for category variables, and these three are primarily for numeric variables. So these are the different visualizations that we have. And then they said, oh, and yeah, by the way, we need to know how to make an array, and we need to know how to use NP range. And oh yeah, we do need to know something about these. And I'll also mention in this one that they were saying that, oh yeah, we need to remember that if we need a number like pi, it's actually in there. Or if we need to use the function sine, it's actually in there. In NP, the reason I'm using NP is that's how we abbreviate NumPy. Okay, so this is the list of things that my class decided that they wanted to put on their study guide. Okay, but you know what? Before we do anything else, we need to create a way to put some data in our study guide, right? If we're going to do examples, we're allowed to have examples. So if we're going to put examples in our study guide, where am I going to get this data? And the answer is, now I'm going back to my first day assignment. I'm going back into D2L, just using the back arrow. And there's the course calendar. And if I click on start here, you see the personality variables. And if I click on personality variables, what does it do? It brings up these little code blocks and says, hey, this is the initialization code. So it's going to have the stuff that I need. So I'm pasting in the initialization code block. Okay, and then shift enter, let's say. And there we go. So then we'll actually have the NP for NumPy and so forth. And then what? Oh, here is the code for this data. Okay, boom. And then let's do pers.show 5, right? Oh, and so now we have all of these variables that we can look at, okay? And things that we can use to create examples for these methods that we're going to use. Okay, so now we have the initialization code and we have some data to work with. So we want to do some examples, and I'm going to show you. Notice the double hashtag ahead of this .select. Why am I doing that? Well, it's going to create that in a title. It's a second level title, and it's going to make it bigger and bold. Okay, and that's just going to help me find it easier. Okay, and I'm going to create this table perfect. What am I going to do? Well, I'm actually going to go here in the table to the perfectionism scores. So these are people's score on a real perfectionism measure. Okay, and so what is perfect? Perfect is going to be the personality variables, pers.select. And then what do? I open my parentheses and put it in quotes, and I'm going to get biological sex. And I am going to get sit class. This is where people prefer to sit in class, front, middle, or back. And I'm also going to get perf, which is the perfectionism scores. And I want this thing to print out just a few lines so I can make sure that I've got what I want. And I do. I've got a 3-column table. Why? Because I put 3 variables in my .select method. So it puts them in that order. Biological sex is first, and sit class in the middle, and so forth. Okay. And am I going to do anything else with select? Yes, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to type something in here to tell myself about how I would like to use it. And for the moment, I'm just going to put ... in there. And we'll talk about this more in just a moment. Why did I do the perfect data set? Well, because I wanted to talk about how to use .group. Okay, so I'm going to change this from code to markdown, and then when I hit shift enter, again, it's larger. Okay, and what happens when I do perfect.group and I just say, hey, group by sit class? Okay, well, notice that sit class is a category variable with 3 different categories, front, middle, and back. And what does it do? Well, it just counts up all of the people who like to sit in the back, that's 28, and the people that like to sit up front. And notice that the majority of people like to sit in the middle. Okay, so that's great. And again, am I going to, sorry, let me click on this and hit the plus sign. Am I going to put some text in here to remind me how to use it? Yes, we'll talk about that in just a moment. I want to also show you that I don't just want to do sit class. I want to remember that, oh, if I do NP average, it does this nice um, thing where it gives me the average perfectionism score for everybody. Okay, and notice this, that the people who like to sit in the front of class, and this was about 10 years ago that we collected this data, but these are UNG students, and the ones who wanted to sit in the front of class had much higher perfectionism scores. So this is a nice graphic that we can use. Okay, and but it's only about sit class. Um, we can do biological sex and get the same information. And notice that the females had a slightly higher perfectionism score than the males did. Okay, so that's again one of the narratives we'd like to tell about these. And then let's use the double hashtag and put pivot here. Why? Because a pivot table does something very similar to group, but the group works best with one variable, and pivot is made to work with two variables, right? So let's put in two variables. Let's start with sex and then put in sit class. Boom. And now you notice that since sex was first, it puts the different categories of biological sex, female and male, across the top, and it puts the back, front, and middle, the different choices for categories in sit class, it puts them vertically in this first column, so I can find out that the number of males who like sitting in the front was 13. Okay, so it's a really nice display for two variables. Okay, but what if I wanted to do this? I want the average. What I'd like to be able to do is just go comma NP average, but it's gonna throw an error code, so that's not what we want. Okay, so I'm gonna show you what we do. Values equals, and I have to tell it the values that I want. And the values that I want are going to come from the perfectionism column. And then I tell it to collect equals. And by the way, I can put max or min. I can do a lot of different things. But if I do NP average, I have exactly what we're seeing up here, except now we have it for two variables. And I can see, oh, the males who like to sit up front, by the way, this is the highest score we see, is the males that like to sit in the front had the highest average perfectionism score. Now they're only slightly higher than the females who wanted to sit up front. So maybe there's no scientific difference, right? There's a big difference here. The females who sat in the back actually had reasonably high perfectionism scores. And the males who wanted to sit in the back, who prefer sitting in the back, had lower ones. Okay, so what have I done? I've created this group, this table, sorry, called perfect, and you can see it here. Why? To use with things. I do want to show things like .group and .pivot. They will be in my table. And I also wanted to go over these with y'all so that you can learn how to use .group and .pivot. They will be on the midterm. So that's it for now. I've gone on long enough, and I'll be back to help you with more of this study guide soon.